Well, thank you very much, David, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Boy, there's nothing like the constant reminder of the clock to put you perfectly at ease at the podium, eh? Well, it's a great honor to be with you tonight. I understand that over the years, this event has been somewhat of a coming out party for new premiers. So when my staff asked me back in November about co-chairing tonight's event, naturally, I said yes. It wasn't until after I agreed that I found out that my colleague, Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall, was such a hit last year. Now, I can't promise to be able to top Brad's speech. Besides, frankly, I'm used to being upstaged. When you come from a town like Cole Harbour, where Sidney Crosby grew up, you have to remind yourself constantly that you will never be the most famous person from Cole Harbour. I want to thank the Public Policy Forum for inviting me here tonight to co-chair with Chantal Hebert, a face that I'm sure is much more familiar to you than my own. I was once a newspaper reporter, so I respect the job of the media, even as the reporters try to boil their stories down to a tweet. I'm delighted to have the chance to talk about the great province of Nova Scotia and my first 10 months as Premier, the first NDP Premier east of Ontario, I might add. They told me that you were dying to know what a true East Coast New Democrat looked like. Now, unfortunately, Danny Williams couldn't make it tonight, so I know you've had NDP premiers here before: Mike Harcourt, Alan Blakeney, Roy Romano, and of course, Gary Dewar. In fact, something you may not know is that Alan Blakeney is actually a native of Nova Scotia from down the South Shore, a little town called Bridgewater, not far, in fact, from my own home. He is proof that there was a time when Nova Scotia New Democrats had to head west in order to be elected Premier. Well, I'm happy to say that that's not the case anymore. That's good news for Brad Wall, because now he just has to worry about the local competition. The NDP won a majority government by focusing, since 2003, on the goal of a better deal for today's families. It was also a personal goal of mine to lead a government that steadily improves the quality of the professional public service and public service leadership. I started by asking the then clerk of the Executive Council and head of the Civil Service, Bob Fowler, to delay his long-planned retirement. Now, I'm sure you can imagine how that conversation went. But in the end, he agreed, and for our first 6 months, I had the tremendous advantage of an advisor who knew how government operated and how it could be improved. I appointed a Deputy Minister of Policy and Priorities, Rick Williams, to ensure that sound, innovative public policy became integral to governing in Nova Scotia. And I was pleased to hear that departments were warned to sharpen their game because our cabinet ministers actually read all of the submissions that came before them. Now, perhaps that's because the NDP places a particular value on quality public service, or maybe it just reflects the kind of change that was overdue in Nova Scotia. I've always said that our province benefits from being part of a strong Atlantic region and from being part of an even stronger Canada. A region of 2.3 million people is a stronger market and a more attractive economy than one province alone. Let me tell you a little bit about what Nova Scotia can do for Canada. We are a province that is committed to a greener, more sustainable planet. Just last week, I announced our province's new renewable electricity plan, which set the goal by 2020, 40% of Nova Scotia's electricity will come from renewable energy sources like tidal power. That is a 4-fold increase in renewable energy. Now, it's no secret that the Bay of Fundy has the highest tides in the world. And I can remember telling people at the climate change conference in Copenhagen that we had tides that reach 50 feet. And they would say, "You mean 15 feet?" And I would say, "No, 50 feet, 50. Nova Scotia is strategically located to take full advantage of this enormous resource. In fact, the largest in-stream tidal turbine in North America is already in place in the Bay of Fundy. Our strategic location is also ideal for shipping. As companies strive to maximize their profitability, there is a clear trend toward larger and larger ships. And larger ships require deeper water. Nova Scotia has the most advantageously positioned deep water ports on the east coast of North America, and thus represents Canada's way to capture this business. Halifax already offers a faster, better value route for Asia and Europe. I'm sure you're following me on all this. I don't know if I'm going too fast, but if I am, you can blame that on David. So Nova Scotia won some big news recently with one of the largest commercial enterprises in the world. Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine of South Korea has chosen our province as its North American production base for its expansion into the wind turbine business. Now, this is big news for Nova Scotia and for Canada. When nations like South Korea look at how they can expand into North America, a jurisdiction like Nova Scotia can take innovative approaches to partnering and bring more investment into our country. As an NDP Premier in the new millennium, it is important for me to ask what Nova Scotia can do for this country and for the world, because the NDP is about taking on its share of the world's work. Now, I know I've barely scratched the surface, but I'm already over time, so I guess that's my first strike of the evening. At least no one resorted to dinner rolls. Before I hand things over to Chantal, I want to come back to our distinguished honorees for just a second. In their own and very different ways, each person has left an important mark on our country. Preston Manning by thinking big and stirring things up. Carol Taylor as a groundbreaking finance minister in British Columbia. Phil Fontaine for helping to put Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Canadians on the path to reconciliation. And finally, Tony Dean as an inspiring public service innovator. I'm honored to share the stage with all of these people tonight, as well as award winners Bernard Jerome and Gabrielle Brand-Lopez. Let me wrap up on that note, ladies and gentlemen, because we have a lot of business ahead of us. We have 2 awards to confer before dinner, the Hyman Solomon Journalism Award and our Emerging Leaders Award. We'll break for dinner about 7:15, and the festivities will resume just after 8 o'clock with our video program and the chance to hear from each of the 4 Public Policy Forum award winners. Finally, we'll hear from David Mitchell, who is promising to wrap things up at 9:15. So thanks again for your warm welcome. It's my pleasure to be here tonight. I'm now delighted to surrender the microphone to my co-chair, Chantal Hebert.